Hello, and welcome to the Servant Leadership Today podcast. My name is Sam Shinton. I'm joined by Rick Kite. Each episode, we talk with leaders in a variety of fields about character, the common good, and the importance of civic virtue. Hi, Rick. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Sam. If I can find my mute button to turn it off, everything else is good.
Well, that's great. Everything going well otherwise, other than trying to find your mute button? I see you're in a sport coat today. You had a Rotary meeting. Was that right?
I just got back introducing a speaker who talked to us about fraud and somebody who's ex-felon and very interesting, like when people have from all walks of life have opportunities to reflect back on why do we take the choices we do. And oftentimes those reflections are regrettable. We've made wrong choices. And that's why it's so important to have discussions like the one we're going to have today. Like, how do we start thinking with foresight so that we choose a life that we want to live and do it intentionally, rather than looking back and saying, how should I have lived?
Yeah, absolutely. And our guest today certainly has put out the blueprint for many decades about how to live life by being intentional. So our guest today is Dr. Kent Keith. Dr. Kent Keith is a dynamic speaker and writer whose mission is to help people find personal meaning in a crazy world. He has been featured on the front page of the New York Times and in People magazine, the Washington Post, the San Francisco Chronicle, and Family Circle. He has appeared on dozens of TV shows and more than 100 radio programs in the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, Korea, and Australia. Over the years, Dr. Keith has given more than 1,000 presentations, conference papers, and seminars on a wide variety of topics in the United States and 11 countries in Europe and Asia. His current presentations and seminars are focused on servant leadership, the Paradoxical Commandments, finding personal meaning at home and at work, and the positive impact of morality in the workplace. Dr. Keith was born in New York and raised in Nebraska, California, Virginia, and Rhode Island before arriving in Hawaii in 1962. He received a BA in government from Harvard University, a master's degree in philosophy and politics from Oxford University, a certificate in Japanese from Waseda University in Tokyo, a JD from the University of Hawaii, and an education doctorate from the University of Southern California. He's also a Rhodes Scholar. Pretty impressive resume there. Dr. Keith practiced law for several years as an associate in the commercial litigation section of Cades, Shute, Fleming, and Wright. He served for 7 years in the state of Hawaii Department of Planning and Economic Development, rising through the ranks to become the director of the department and a member of the governor's cabinet. From 2007 to 2012, he served as the CEO of the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership in the United States. And from 2012 to 2015, he served as CEO of the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership Asia, based in Singapore. He served from 2015 to 2020 as president of Pacific Rim Christian University in Honolulu. He is now president of his family company, Carlson Keith Corporation. Welcome, Dr. Kent Keith.
Nice to be with you. Hello.
Hello. It's wonderful to have you on today. So the Paradoxical Commandments, I think this is the thing that maybe a lot of people know about you. You devised these originally in the late 60s when you were very young and happened to then find out that they were posted of all places on the wall of one of Mother Teresa's mission homes in Calcutta, among other places that the influence had gone wide and far. And then in 2001, you wrote a book called Anyway, The Paradoxical Commandments, Finding Personal Meaning in a Crazy World. Maybe you could tell for those who are not familiar with the Paradoxical Commandments, what your impetus for doing this was and how that has maybe shaped your work.
Sure, I'd be happy to. It does go way back to the time when I was in high school. And I was very interested in ideas about leadership and how do we work together to make things better. And I was concerned about, why would you do those things? And I remember a special moment in my life was actually walking into the awards ceremony at my high school. And Sam, I'm sorry to say this, but I was a pretty cocky kid. As I was walking into the stadium, I was not wondering whether or not I would get an award. I was wondering how many. But as I walked into the stadium, I started thinking about it, and I realized that I felt so good about what I had done and what we had done together that I didn't need any awards. I felt I'd already been rewarded. I'd already been rewarded with the meaning and satisfaction that came from doing those things. And that was a moment of real inner peace and spiritual liberation for me. That's when I discovered that, if you have the meaning, you don't have to have the glory. The meaning would be enough to sustain you. So I went on to college, and I was working with high school students during the 60s, which was a pretty tumultuous time. A lot of conflict and confrontation, also a lot of hope and a lot of ideals about how we can make the world better. And I was discouraged to see so many young people rush out into the world to make it better and then come back much too soon. Discouraged because they didn't bring about change. Unhappy because people didn't seem to appreciate what they were trying to do. And I was traveling the country giving talks, and I was trying to encourage them by saying, if you go out and do what you think is right and good and true, that should give you a lot of meaning and satisfaction. If people appreciate you, fine. If they don't, you still get the meaning and satisfaction. And by the way, it usually takes time to bring about change. And so you really got to love people, because that's one of the strongest motivations that can keep you going until change is finally achieved. So that was the message. And I finally sat down to write a little booklet for student leaders. It was called The Silent Revolution, Dynamic Leadership in the Student Council. And I was just trying to make this point about meaning. And so as just part of that book, in one of the chapters, I wrote what I called the Paradoxical Commandments. Each one starts with a statement about something that can be difficult or irritating or disappointing, but each one's followed by the positive commandment to do the right thing anyway. And the right thing always turns out to be the meaningful thing. The first one, for example, people are illogical, unreasonable, and self-centered. Love them anyway. I mean, you still got to love people. You still got to have that connection, that meaning that will sustain you. So that's how it came about. We published that little booklet that the Paradoxical Commandments were in. We sold 20 or 30,000 copies around the country. I went on with my life, did not know what was happening to the Paradoxical Commandments. What I know now is that people were taking them out of that little booklet and putting them up on their walls and on their refrigerator doors and putting them in commencement addresses, and they spread. And this was before the internet. This is people were spreading by mailing copies to each other or sharing text. Spread around the world. Millions of people have come to use them. The moment that changed my life occurred at my Rotary Club. And this was way back. The Rotarian who started the day, clubs will begin with a poem or a prayer or a thought for the day. And he began by reading something that he said was by Mother Teresa. And he read it in honor of the fact that she'd passed away only 2 weeks before. So I was there in the room, and I bowed my head to listen to whatever he was going to read. And what he read was 8 of the original 10 Paradoxical Commandments, exactly as I'd written them. So, I didn't suddenly go, wow, I didn't suddenly jump up. But I went up afterwards and I said, that piece that you read, where did you get it? And he said, isn't it wonderful? And I said, well, actually, I wrote it. Well, he gave me that look, like you poor megalomaniac claiming to have written something by Mother Teresa. But he was a Rotarian, as Rick knows, so he was polite. He was thoughtful. But he couldn't remember where he got it. It was in a book about Mother Teresa. So I went to a bookstore and found there's a whole shelf of books about Mother Teresa. So I just started on the left and worked through every page of every book until I finally found it. It was the last page before the appendix in a book called Mother Teresa, A Simple Path. And it didn't say she wrote it. It said a sign on the wall at Shishu Bhavan, the children's home in Calcutta. And that's how I learned that someone had given her a copy, and she thought it was important enough to put up on the wall for her and others to look at as they ministered to their children. And that just really meant a lot to me. I'm getting the chills just remembering that moment. I wanted to jump up and down, shout, scream, do something. Obviously, I have tremendous respect for Mother Teresa. Also, my wife and I have been in many children's homes over the years in a number of countries. So the idea that she had it and that's where she put it up on the wall, that meant a lot to me. And that's when I decided maybe I should do something. And so I started writing and speaking about the Paradoxical Commandments again 30 years after they were first published.
Well, and you mentioned the first commandment, people are illogical, unreasonable, and self-centered, love them anyway. And then you open in the book that you had done back in 2001 with this line from the Peanuts cartoon, Lucy, in the Peanuts cartoon strip by Charles Schulz once said, "I love mankind. It's people I can't stand." And you know, I read that line and I read that commandment. And of course, you laugh when you read that. And then you step back and say, wow, are we living in a moment right now where it just seems like there's a lot of this anger and hatred for other people and particularly people we disagree with. And I'm asked all the time. I do a lot of work on civics, and I'm asked all the time by people, well, how do we have these conversations with people we just can't stand or we just can't disagree? And you try to give us that lesson here. So how do we do that? How do we love these people anyway, despite the fact that they might be illogical, wrong, mean,
Yeah.
whatever it might be?
Yeah. So it's not that it's easy. It's really partly it's how you think about it. First of all, I think of love as something at its best, it's unconditional. It's deeper than agreement or approval. And that's the kind of love that can really bring us together, and the kind of love that holds us together, the kind of love that holds a family together, for example, or our community. So it's how you think about love, something deeper than agreement or approval. So you can love someone you don't agree with or you don't approve of their behavior. I think it also requires a certain amount of humility. You know, I'm not always, I don't always behave in the way that I think I should. I don't always agree with myself. You know, each of us is imperfect. And so there are times when I appear to others, I'm sure, to be illogical, unreasonable, and self-centered. So it's not just about them, it's about me also. And if I can be a little bit humble in the way I look at myself, and if I can think of love as something deeper than agreement or approval when I look at others, I think it's still possible to love. I think it's still possible to connect. And there's something actually that I find joyful when that happens, because if you are able to work with and get along with and live with people you don't agree with, it means there is something deeper going on that's holding you together. And often that thing is love.
How do we rebuild that? I guess is the word, in communities that are so fractured today, where we don't find a lot of common spaces to come together, for example, to even maybe spark that love for one another.
You know, one of the things that Robert Greenleaf really emphasized in his writings on servant leadership was the importance of listening. Now, the premier skill of the servant leader is to listen. And I think one of the challenges in listening is really listening and postponing judgment. That we're really listening rather than preparing our counter argument, that we're really listening and being open to something new that might change the way we see things. And some people would call that a dialogue, when there's deeper listening that can result in something new, not my position or your position, but something new that we can both understand and run with, that emerges from true listening or deep listening. So I think that's part of it. I think part of it also is, you know, in what environment, in what context do you listen? People are good at listening in different ways. Some seem to be small differences. Some people listen best when they're walking along in a park side by side. They're not looking at each other. Some people are able to listen better on a telephone when they're not looking at each other. Some people find that you really listen best when you are looking at each other. Some people listen best when they're working on a project together. They're building something together. So they're not confronting each other. They're working alongside each other, and they can talk. So I think part of it is creating the environment in which you don't start out in sort of a confrontational context where I'm on one side of the table, you're on the other side of the table, and we feel like opponents the moment we sit down.
Another thing that I really like that runs through the commandments and you're writing about them is this reminder that so much of the good work we do and so much of our works generally in life are transitory, right?
Right.
That we can do a lot of good work and we may not be appreciated for that good work at the time, or that we might do good work and we might build something up only to see it disappear or to never be recognized. How do we motivate people to really wrestle with this and to accept that transitory nature of our good works?
Yeah, I think there are a number of dimensions of that, Sam. Part of it is what are you striving for? If you're trying to achieve what I call the symbols of success, like power, wealth, and fame, then you see your activities as needing to lead to the achievement of those things. That your ego needs those things to be satisfied. And we know pretty well from the wisdom of our elders and teachings that those things don't really satisfy. What if what you're really striving for is authenticity, integrity, personal growth? What if what you're really looking for is meaning, a meaningful life? The interesting thing is that the symbols of success really depend on other people. Yes, your efforts make a difference, but it's something people can give to you or take away from you. Whereas these other things that have to do with personal growth and meaning is mostly about you. It's not about what you have, it's about who you are. And you have a great deal of control over that. So if you are really trying to live a life of integrity and authenticity, that's a different kind of goal or approach than if you are trying to get something like power, wealth, and fame. So I think that's a real basic difference in how people approach this area. I think that the importance of meaning as a motivator is not widely understood or accepted. It's a huge issue. It's big. It's a big issue at work. It's a big issue in daily life, and the meaning that you find is yours no matter what. And people can't take it away from you. And nothing that happens subsequent to what you do reduces that. I've been involved in. I worked over 40 years. I worked for 9 different organizations. I led organizational change in 5 of them. 4 of them were pretty dramatic life or death turnaround situations. And, I'm really happy about what we achieved. We did amazing things. It was really meaningful. In a couple of cases, it didn't last. And of course, we wanted it to. But to me, that didn't change the fact that what we did was important and it was the right thing to do. It was a meaningful thing to do. And that meaning we can take with us. In the book, I have the image of my wife and daughter being at the beach, creating a sandcastle, and it's fun and they enjoy it and it's a meaningful thing to do together. And then the waves come up and wash it away and it's gone. But they still had that meaningful experience and it's still theirs. And I think that's what we need to remember. I also think, again, with a little bit of humility, most of us stand on the shoulders of those who went before us. And so, we probably got some problems from them, but we probably got some benefits and assets from them as well. And so it's part of this idea that you are a steward and that you have this time to contribute, and then it's the next person's turn. They may just see it differently. They may be able to do things you weren't able to do. That's good for the organization. So the meaning comes with the contribution you made when you made it, and that's always yours. Nobody can take that away.
Kent, this is really interesting because I've been familiar with the Paradoxical Commandments, and then your work as executive director of the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership, and never really put the two together. I thought they were probably complementary, but when you talked about this idea of a realization that intrinsic meaning in your own life was so much more important than the rewards. And while this seems to me what Greenleaf is saying in servant leadership, what you do is try to the greatest extent possible to lead through intrinsic motivation, give people the benefit of the doubt, and not rely on kind of the easy path, which is a series of sanctions, rewards, and punishments.
Right. And I think that, again, I think what happens is you are rewarded. You're rewarded in the sense that you get the meaning and the satisfaction and the self-fulfillment. It's just that those are not the rewards that the secular commercial society normally considers a reward, because you may get power, wealth, and fame, but you may not. What I'm saying is, if you are seeking to do the right thing, you're identifying and meeting the needs of others. You're showing your love for people by helping them to grow and achieve what they can achieve. If you're doing all that, you're getting something back. You're getting something really important. You're getting something spiritual. You may be working hard so that there are material results for the organization, but you can be getting spiritual results for yourself.
Well, I'm interested in some of the psychological studies that show that the two kinds of motivation are not really cumulative. They don't, when you add one to the other, it doesn't say double your motivation. They're competing in the mind. You can only focus on one at a time. And I think that's probably true, like in our work as well, that we have to focus at a certain time on a particular kind of motivation. And I know I have much more energy when I'm focused on something as intrinsic motivation. I have much more energy to bring to it.
Right, and this is where I think that there's a whole lot more that we need to share about intrinsic motivation and meaning as an intrinsic motivator. So the research that shows that people who are intrinsically motivated basically perform better, more persistent, more productive, a higher level of performance. And then I tie that to meaning, which is, research has shown is an intrinsic motivator. And you're saying, well, if you find meaning in what you're doing, you can perform at a higher level. So leaders should be promoting a sense of meaning in their work and the work of their colleagues so that everyone can perform at their highest and best level. I mean, I think that's supposed to be obvious, but to some people it's not. This is not just a warm and fuzzy namby-pamby, gee, wouldn't it be nice if people found meaning in their work? This is a bottom line, hard-nosed performance kind of issue. And there's more research coming out that relates to that. Adam Grant has done some work that shows that if you have the pro-social motivation, the desire to serve, and the intrinsic motivation that comes from the fact that you're growing and you find the work meaningful, then you perform it at higher levels. So it's a very practical thing. And I think it's wonderful that coincides with this idea that you can be a servant leader focused on others, and that gives you the meaning and that gives you the performance and that sustains you. How do you continue year after year in this servant leadership mode of loving and helping others? Well, you get the meaning, you get the intrinsic motivation that keeps you going.
Well, and that's also the downside, in some ways, a limiting factor of servant leadership also for people that aren't intrinsically motivated themselves. It's almost impossible for them to find ways of leading by motivating others internally, motivating through meaning, isn't it? I mean, so it's hard to institutionalize servant leadership for that reason.
Well, I think, well, one of the reasons I think it's hard to institutionalize servant leadership is people need to see real life examples. I mean, it's not what they're used to. Most cultures teach what I call the power model of leadership. So, leadership is described as being, how do you acquire and wield power? How do you make people do things? How do you attack and win? How do you slam your competitor? So it's defined in power terms. And then that's combined with an emphasis on extrinsic motivation, basically trying to manipulate people with rewards and punishments. And even theory X, from McGregor's idea of theory X and theory Y, people don't really want to work. You got to threaten them or give them incentives to get them to work. So it's a whole mindset: power, extrinsic motivation, theory X. But there's another one, and that's the servant leader one. That's the service model, which says leadership's not about acquiring and wielding power. It's about making a positive difference in the lives of others. And then you've got intrinsic motivation, which actually produces better results. And then you got theory Y, which says, yeah, people are intelligent and they can contribute. Let's grow them and help them to make their maximum contribution. So those are two very different attitudes toward what a leader should do and what kind of results they can get. And I think it's really sad that the power model and extrinsic motivation and theory X are so dominant, because I think they're very, well, they're degrading, actually. I mean, they basically degrade who we are as human beings and what we're capable of doing. I see servant leadership as doing the opposite, and helping people, empowering people, seeing them grow to their fullest potential. But the power model is dominant, and people grow up surrounded by all those ideas. It's hard for them to imagine there's a different way. And I think, you know, you can teach them, you can show them, but they really need to see it being done on a regular basis. And that's where having an example makes a big difference.
You know, you built this when you were very young, and I know you've worked like Rick and myself with a lot of young people over the years. And if I look out at the landscape today, the young people are surrounded and immersed in social media, which to me seems to be, you know, reward just the opposite, right? It rewards extrinsic conditions, not intrinsic. How do we battle that in our contemporary world, where so much of it seems like what people get their rewards from is extrinsic, is extrinsically motivated?
Again, I mean, the studies that I've seen, there's a really big impact when you simply take young people off to camp or somewhere and take their phones away. And they start learning how to communicate with each other, and they begin to sense each other. They read each other's body language. They actually become a group. They start to care about each other. I mean, this is really tough. We're looking at people spending 8 to 10 hours a day on some kind of a screen, and that's having a huge impact. And on young people, there's been an increase in risk factors for suicide. More of them reporting that they're lonely. More of them reporting that they're unhappy. And the trend lines seem to start shifting in that negative direction at about the time that smartphones saturated the marketplace, somewhere around 2007. So yeah, it's a really big concern. And the only way I know to work on that is to get people face to face, doing something together that they can care about. I think a related issue is, what is it that we talk to young people about? And I've had problems with K to 12 education ever since I was in K to 12. All the things that young people really need to know to become competent and caring adults, they're pretty much not taught in school. So we rely on other organizations, nonprofits, churches, aunts, uncles, parents, grandparents, and whomever to try to teach. I mean, we're not focused on what they need in terms of how to relate to other people, how to work together, skills of being a good citizen. What are you going to need to know to be a good parent? Just all kinds of things that are about life. And we do not prepare young people for those things. So if you think about what is it that young people are really worried about and really think about, are we really addressing them? Are we creating environments in which we can talk to them about it? I think that's a real challenge, but I think it's really important. And this is a really old issue. By the way, I really worked hard to be a good student in high school. I was studying 5 hours a night. I got good grades, and I've used almost none of what I memorized for high school. And I went on to college and college again and college again. What I have used every day is what I learned in extracurricular activities. Student government, clubs, drama. I mean, those were real skill builders in terms of how do you work with people, how do you be a team, how do you focus on a project and work your way through to completion. But that's been called extra, and it's been after school. So I think we've got a lot of issues that are maybe deeper or beyond the social media issues, but we really need to connect with young people on the issues that are really worrying them the most. I mean, one is just, can I grow up and make it in the world? And we've cut them off from the real world compared with, I mean, my parents' generation, now we're going way back, of course. You look at their high school yearbook and they all look old. Now, maybe it's the hairstyle, but by the time they graduated from high school, My dad and his friends in school had done real adult work on a farm, in a store. I mean, they knew what the real world was like. Now, that didn't mean they wanted to do that the rest of their life, but they knew they could. They knew they could make it in the world. They now, so it was really different. We try to keep young people out of the labor market now, so they don't have a lot of real world experience. They just have a lot of doubts. So I think there are a lot of issues that come to this. Question I like to ask is this the school system that we would create if we really loved our children and cared about what they were going to do with the rest of their lives? And in a lot of cases, the answer is no. This is a system we built because we're assuming they're all going to be academics, and they're not.
Well, and it seems, that we have this existing issue, and of course, it's been exacerbated by 2 years of pandemic. Right. And so what we've done basically is had 2 years of disruption to all the things that you talk about.
Right.
Extracurricular activities, getting together with people, looking at people face to face. Even now in the classroom, you're usually looking at somebody's eyes, and I'm becoming a very good reader of other people's eyes. But of course, that's 1/3 of the face, and so you're missing the smile and the acknowledgement and the expressiveness that comes with that. Is this going to be a challenge for us going forward? Are we going to have to do some extra work to deal with this disruption that we're coming out of here?
Sure. Oh, no, for sure. And I think that it's there's some fundamental issues, and one is the balance of individualism and community. And this is something that differs from country to country. But in these studies, comparative culture studies that have been done, the United States rates very high in individualism compared with, say, another country like Japan. And being very individualistic, we tend to want to do things that we want to do, and we tend to be focused on our rights rather than what the community needs and the rights of the community. And so there's some real fundamental questions about balance, about where do we fit, and because we're so strong in the individual side, which has benefits in terms of innovation and creativity. I think we're suffering in terms of how to deal with a big community issue like a pandemic. So I think there's some really basic stuff about who are we as people, how do we relate to each other, how do we give the community enough rights to protect the rights of its individuals. So we got that in addition to more specific issues of, how do we get together and share our thoughts and feelings. I have to keep remembering that when I smile, nobody can see it. Because I've got a mask on. I thought I was just sending a nice signal to somebody with a smile, and no, they can't see the smile unless there's a little bit more wrinkle around my eyes. They don't know.
Yeah, it's I have one student in one of my classes who you can tell when she smiles because her eyes just do something. But I always have to point out to my students, I say, well, that was a joke. I am smiling under this mask right now, and hopefully you are as well. In addition to the Paradoxical Commandments, you also created this universal moral code.
Yeah.
And what I really like about this is it's almost Zen-like in its approach, in that you start with a list of do no harm and list a bunch of factors of how we should live life by doing no harm. And then you flip it on its head and say, do good, and then list a bunch of characteristics by which we can do good. What motivated you to create this, and how has that spread throughout your work?
There are a couple of things that motivated it. I actually wrote it for a book called Morality and Morale, which is one of these little stories about how doing the right thing, it gives you a kind of raises your morale, gives you a kind of energy, which is something I found in doing some very simple research, that people found meaning in living their values and doing what's right. I think one of the first things that came to me was I was meeting young people, college students, who really felt that everybody had their own moral code. I have mine, you have yours. It's just subjective. And there's a lot of subjectivists in the world. C.S. Lewis, I think it was, that suggested loaning one of those people a $20 bill, and when they ask for it back, say, no, in my moral code, I don't have to repay anybody. But anyway, we have subjectivists and then objectivists. And I think the objectivist idea, which is where I find myself, is that people all over the world, over the centuries in different countries and cultures, have come to similar conclusions about how we should behave. And these are very fundamental conclusions, like don't kill or don't lie or don't commit incest or, take care of your children. And so on a fundamental level, there's a lot of agreement. And I think that's an objective fact. Because we agree at the most fundamental level, we argue like mad over how to apply those principles. And so, don't kill. Okay, so how do we come out on the issue of abortion or war or capital punishment? We argue like mad, we have differences, but we start with a fundamental agreement. What triggered the specific Universal Moral Code draft was the behavior of corporations in 2001 and 2002, Enron and others that were, committing fraud and doing really bad things. And it gave rise to the impression that there are companies that really think that there are two moral codes. There's one for us as individuals and there's another one for corporations. And that just cannot be the case. Just because a group of individuals get together and form a corporation doesn't mean now they have a license to be immoral. Corporations may be legal persons, but they're full of people, and they should follow a moral code. So there's no binary or bifurcated moral code. There's only one, and there's a lot of agreement at the most fundamental level about what's in that one. So you wouldn't go next door and poison your neighbor's water. But that doesn't mean that you can join a corporation and pollute a river that people draw their water from. It isn't two codes, it's only one code. So that's kind of what got me going on this issue, that I believe there is one basic code, and there are different cultures, different interpretations, different emphases, but at the most fundamental level, it's similar. And why would that be? Because these are ideas about how we can get along best. How can we live together? And human beings are similar all over the world, their basic needs, and they've come to similar conclusions about how we can get along and live together in a balanced way that's pretty good for individuals and pretty good for the community as a whole. So that's why they've come out very similarly.
Yet the professionalization of ethics, where you have ethics officers in many corporations and so forth, it seems mainly to protect corporations from legal problems and also to protect their reputation, right? And so you can see why this, I guess, misunderstanding would develop, that there's two separate things. There's kind of professional ethics, and then there's personal morality, which is entirely different. And I agree with you, but I see it everywhere now, this kind of distinction being made between the two and a difficulty in reconciling them.
Yeah, I don't think you can. I think there's only one code, and it should pervade. You shouldn't leave your morality at the door. And one thing that's perverted that is shareholder primacy. And there was a study done by Jacob Rose in which he asked experienced directors of corporations to do some hypotheticals, and they were willing to say in a certain situation they had a corporation that could increase the earnings per share by emitting a toxin into the atmosphere that would hurt human beings, harm their health. And these directors voted to do it under the assumption they had to do it in order to increase earnings per share because shareholders were the owners of the business and they had priority. Well, as a matter of law, they are not the owners of the business. And it's not ethical to hurt people, to hurt one group in order to get more money for a second group. All stakeholders contribute to the organization and help it work. So yeah, there are a number of bad things that come out of this sort of bifurcation. The interesting thing is that when you're putting a corporation together and you're starting it, that's not the story you tell. When you're trying to recruit employees and you're trying to attract customers, but eventually it can turn in that direction. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done on this front. I think part of it too is, Rick, you talk about making sure that they follow the law. I think that I've seen cases where people think that the legal requirement is not the legal minimum, it's the maximum.
Mhm.
And there's an ethical opportunity to do far more than the legal minimum. There's nothing to prevent you from doing more and doing better, treating people better. But they sink down to what the law only requires us to do so much, and that's all we're going to do. And so, I mean, I've been in environments at business schools where students are told, don't worry about ethics. Try to follow the law if you can, but don't worry about ethics. I mean, if you manufacture a car with a gas tank that's going to explode and kill people, just budget to pay off the claims when they file suit. And there's no, I mean, I've even read a piece by a business school professor that says that business decisions are not ethical decisions. Well, any decision that affects any human beings is an ethical decision. So yeah, it's really gone in a bad direction as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I think that's been going on for some time. I remember when I first started teaching courses in business ethics, I had some of my students tell me that their professors in the business school were telling them to disregard anything I said in a business ethics class because it didn't apply. Like we were just teaching that in the program because it looked good, but like once you get in the real world, that doesn't apply. And at the time, I thought it was kind of funny because I could, just talk to them about like what kind of life do they want to lead and what kind of company would they really want to work for. But there's something really pernicious about that when that's a widespread view.
Well, and I think part of the reason is this shareholder primacy idea, and a focus on financial returns. I was down at a fairly prestigious university in the South with a couple hundred of their business school students, and I gave them a hypothetical. I don't know what numbers I use, but I gave them an A and a B. An A is a corporation that's getting like a 20% return, but they treat their employees badly and they treat their customers badly and they treat the community badly. And then company B is making a 10% return, but they treat their employees well and their customers well and the community well. Which is the better corporation? And they all raised their hand and said A because it's making a higher return. And that was their sole criterion. And that's not an ethical, I mean, the only ethical position is to care about everybody the organization touches. And that could be a government, a nonprofit, a for-profit, any organization. Now, they may have conflicting needs. You may have to really wrangle with that as to how do you try to balance those needs and do your best by all of them. But you should be paying attention. You should be trying, not ignoring.
Well, and it completely ignores like the real life trauma that it causes for people like employees of Wells Fargo, for example. When a policy is put in place that requires their employees to cheat their customers, and then they have a hard time living with themselves, right? Like,
yeah.
This is a terrible thing to do to people.
No, I agree. And that's one of the saddest examples, actually.
I'm curious about your experience, you serving as the university president. So after this work you did with the Greenleaf Center and working with organizations on servant leadership and so forth, then you go into university presidentship. And you've already talked about the way in which K through 12 really doesn't prepare young people for living in the world. Did you think at that time that the universities are doing a better job of that, or was that part of your motivation for taking on that role?
Well, actually, I had the opportunity to serve as a university president twice. And both of them were serious turnarounds. In each case, the university was expected to have 3 months to maybe 6 months to live, and then it would have to close its doors. And so they weren't positions that I applied for. I know, real plum, there was a lot of competition. I was asked if I would come in and lead a team to try to turn those institutions around. And because we had a good team and we stayed with it, we were able to do that. That was really the issue is, how do you restructure, reaffirm or reshape the mission, restructure the organization, refocus it, hire people who are really committed to that mission or understand. I mean, it was a whole lot of organizational processes. Now, for the second one, we were able to get through that fairly quickly. In the first one, it took the whole time I was there. Really, it took 5 of the 6 years I was there. What we did in the first case, we actually set up a servant leadership institute, and we built up the community service program. We tried to get students focused on serving and connecting with the community, and I think we made some headway. In the second case, I actually started teaching a servant leadership course, and that included it was an applications course, so that every student had to come up with a project. They had to identify a real need and had to come up with a plan and start moving forward and implementing the plan to meet that need. So I was trying to get more of that sort of application going in both instances. But my real job was restructuring, refocusing the institution. It was the change process that I was really there to lead.
Yeah. Do you think that, so you're bringing servant leadership into the university, and I've found, at a number of different places where I've talked, I find people that really embrace the idea of servant leadership. They seem to get it. Others that don't at all. They're resistant for a number of different reasons. And over the years, finding that there's more and more references in our popular culture and in the business world, especially, to servant leadership. Do you think the understanding of what it is, especially the understanding, say, of Greenleaf's vision, as he expressed it early on, do you think that is what is driving this increased recognition of servant leadership, or do you think it is getting diluted, more superficial as it gets more popular?
I don't know, Rick. I mean, I have impressions. There are some people who have diluted it to make it more sellable, to bring it closer to, frankly, to the power model, to what people are used to as a management model. There are people who really focus on the servant part, and that's good, but they're not as focused on the servant leader part. And so there's another step to be taken there. I hope that newer generations coming up, then there's a little bit of documentation I've come across on this, are interested in something more like servant leadership than they are to more of a more top-down authoritarian approach, which might have typified my parents' generation. So I'm hoping that some of this is bubbling up from younger generations entering the workplace. That would be nice if that were the case, that they want to work in a place where the environment is more like the environment a servant leader would create. But I think it's hard to say. The worst thing for me is that someone will go around saying I'm a servant leader and then not be one, so that people get the wrong impression or even a bad impression. So I have a friend in the Netherlands who said that they had a workshop on servant leadership, and one of his friends said, "Well, my boss went to your workshop on servant leadership. He came back to the office, gathered us up, and said, 'Sit down, shut up, and listen. I'm a servant leader. I'm going to tell you what to do.'" We thought, well, maybe that workshop wasn't a success. Didn't really get the message through. So I also think that servant leadership has become kind of almost a subconscious antidote for power-oriented leaders.
Mm-hmm.
They know that it's morally right. They know it's what they should do, but it's not how they were trained. It's not how they grew up. It's not instinctual for them, and they're grappling with it. And so it's kind of like medicine that they need, and maybe we all need, to remind ourselves that we really should be identifying and meeting the needs of others rather than, doing the things that we want for ourselves, like power, wealth, and fame.
Right. I'm always leery of people that talk about it too much. I think that they're probably insisting on it because it doesn't feel natural to them. And so watch out for those people.
Yeah, I feel weird when somebody walks up to me and says, "Hi, Kent, I'm a servant leader." And I want to say, "Oh, wow, that's great. You've made it. I'm still on the journey. I'm still trying." You're already there. Terrific.
The other day, I watched a little bit of a documentary with an interview with Robert Greenleaf, reflecting on writing the essay, The Servant as Leader. And he said something that I guess I'd heard, but I'd never really listened to before, that his reflections And that essay really came together out of his experience serving on the board of some universities and witnessing what was going on to campus culture during the protests of 1968, 69, 70, you know, there's all across the nation, and in some ways in Europe as well, these real dissatisfaction with universities and a perceived corruption. But his concern was that the perceived corruption, the dissatisfaction with university education was legitimate. Those are legitimate concerns by students because the institutions had become too self-satisfied and self-serving. And yet the response by students then was to destroy the institutions. And he thought that would be really regrettable. And it seems to me we're undergoing something very similar right now. And where I used to find the biggest resistance to the idea of servant leadership coming from older and more established leaders who are comfortable with the power model, now I'm finding oftentimes the biggest resistance is from young people who are skeptical about the idea of institutions at all.
Yeah, so you don't even get to the first stage as to how to lead them properly. Yeah, that's
capitalism too, right? Because most of the institutions are based on in the framework of capitalism anyway.
Yeah, and I even the word capitalism carries such a burden of 19th century, misbehavior. I even like to use the word free enterprise instead, or market economy instead. It goes back to me. I mean, this goes back to the 60s. I mean, Greenleaf and I both were stimulated by the 60s. He was just 30 years older than I was when he was in universities that were being turned upside down. I was a student at one. The question is, how is it possible to work together to bring about positive change? And I was a critic of students on my campus who loved symbolic change. I thought if you seized a building, you should paint it and clean it up and make it better. They thought if you seized a building, you should make sure you got on the evening news and rush back to the dormitory in time to see yourself on the evening news. I regret the fact that some of that symbolic action was effective. I think it should not be. But it seems to me there ought to be a way that we can work together to bring about positive change. And that goes back to my problem, which is, what if we're teaching our kids, like in high school, about democracy, but not how to be involved in democracy? We don't teach them about speaking, writing, organizing, working together. We say, here's the ideal, but we don't tell them how to bring about, how to implement the ideal. And I think that is one element of it is, do people know how to work together for the common good? I don't think we do very well in teaching people, and I don't think we start early enough.
Well, and I think partly that is the kind of a skepticism oftentimes, and this comes especially from the left who have real commitment to social justice. And then so they're very receptive to messages about working for the common good, but very skeptical towards power. And
Right.
And so it seems to me like we're not giving our young people the tools to exercise power responsibly in ways that can actually achieve the aims of social justice, right?
Right. My experience in working with high school student leaders a long time ago was they were basically being taught, you got elected, you're great. You can reign as kings and queens and big men and women on campus, but you don't have to worry about anybody else. I was literally, physically run out of town after giving a speech to 300 incoming student council leaders in which I told them, you're a fraud, you're a hoax. You're just doing this to fill out your application form for college, but you could really change some lives if you cared about your fellow students, connected with them, and worked with the administration. You could really make your schools a better place. Well, the students responded really positively. The adults were really unhappy with that message, and that's why I was removed physically from the campus. I went back and talked to some students when I was at the Greenleaf Center, and they're all being encouraged and praised. And again, they were too busy I said, what if you weren't in 3 sports this year? What if you were only in 2 and took off one of those sports to spend time with your fellow students to figure out what they need so you might help them? Oh no, we couldn't do that. So, I mean, we're being taught that it's about them, not about them serving others. And that message seems to be fairly constant, and we get the kind of leadership that we see.
You know, you and Rick have kind of laid out some definite challenges ahead of us, and we've talked about this throughout this discussion here today. Do you feel hopeful about the future, that we will be able to bridge some of these gaps and actually deal with some of these some of the negativity or the pessimism on this, and align ourselves in a way that we can be aligned with these principles of servant leadership, or the positivity that comes out of your paradoxical commandments, for example?
Well, I tell people I wake up optimistic every morning, and I go to bed that way sometimes as well. Here's the strange thing. I care immensely about the ethical side of it, the meaning side of it, which I think we need, a lot more people need to understand and focus on. What gives me hope is servant leadership, or these ideas. They work. They're effective. And we've known that anecdotally, but in the last 15 years or so, we're getting more and more workplace empirical research that is sound, well-designed, showing that it works. So that's not enough to convince somebody whose career was a success because of the power model. They may have trouble, changing their mind. But for people coming up, if anybody is open-minded and they want to know, how do we help our organization to be the most effective, these ideas are not only there, but we got more and more evidence that they are effective. And so people want to be effective. People are pragmatic. The question I've gotten the most over the last 30 years is not, is servant leadership ethical or is it meaningful, but does it work? And we've got more and more evidence that it does, and it's growing in a really nice way. And I'm a practitioner, not a scholar, but I love quoting the scholars and sharing that with my students. A lot of my hope is based on that. I also think that there are a lot of younger generations are going to figure this out. And they're going to want to be treated the way that servant leaders treat people, whether they use the word servant leader or not. That they will treat them with respect. They will help them to perform at high levels. They will really care about who the organization is serving and so forth. So, yeah, I'm pretty hopeful, and I think the driving wedge may actually be the research that says, hey, if you want to be effective, this works better. Take a look at it.
Well, Dr. Ken Keith, I really appreciate that note of optimism and hope, and definitely appreciate all the work that you have done, all the good work that you've done, and all the positivity that you have put out there all these years and continue to put out there. You really do force us to think about how we reflect on our own lives, and despite the challenges that we face. And so thank you for all of your good work. Really
well, thank you. And thank you for the good work that you both do.
Take care, Kent.
Thanks. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.